we just need some kind of cure for this thing, and we all going to go work on it, and then it'll be solved, instead of, hey, we're just born with this clock. Is it
Yeah.
just not like a tenable, like a tangible type problem? Is that hard to wrap people's head around?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, and so the only thing that's happened historically is that society has taken what I'd like to call a salami approach to this. They look at individual aspects of aging and they give them disease-like names, which suddenly, transfers them psychologically into the category of things that medicine is potentially able to deal with. So we've got Alzheimer's disease, we've got Parkinson's disease, we've got atherosclerosis and osteoporosis, anything that ends in osis, you're on solid ground, right? Fine, except that the problem is that even though then they become amenable to medical intervention and to, people approving the idea of throwing money at them and to develop such interventions, the problem is that then the interventions that people try to develop are interventions that address these particular so-called diseases individually. And that turns out to be drastically misguided. That is absolutely not the way that we are ever going to bring any of these so-called diseases under medical control. What we have to do is be more preventative and address the accumulating damage in the body, the molecular and cellular changes that the body does to itself throughout life that are initially harmless because the body's set up to tolerate a certain amount of them, but that eventually trigger these diseases and cause them to progress and to get progressively worse. Now, this is not a new idea. The whole field of gerontology was created on that basis more than a century ago, which is great. Unfortunately, that also took a bit of a wrong turn because people tried to be too preventative and to kind of manipulate metabolism to emulate long-lived species, and that just doesn't work because the creation of damage is just too inextricably intertwined with the things that our metabolism needs to do in order to keep us alive. But now, of course, we have the third approach, the approach that I started pioneering more than 20 years ago now, of damage repair, which is where the real progress is being seen, and especially where the real effort needs to be. So that, of course, is why at LEV Foundation we're doing this combination lifespan study in mice, where we're taking ways to repair various different types of damage and putting them together in the same mice at the same time to identify and optimize for synergy. And we certainly intend to be running a sequence of those experiments, but they're large, they're expensive, and they're very ambitious.
Large, expensive, ambitious. Yeah, it's so there's a lot of it. We talked about this before. If you just all of a sudden got a donation of like $10 million, like $1 million versus 10 million versus 100 million, these large, expensive experiments, do they just become like are you able to scale them better, or are they just like you can run multiple at a time and that would speed things up?
So a lot of that is the case, yes. So different experiments cost different things. There's a contrast here between the kind of experiments that we're doing at LEV Foundation now versus the kind that were the bread and butter of Sense Research Foundation. So at Sense Research Foundation, there are a bunch of projects being pursued in parallel that are really open-ended research. They are addressing particularly difficult types of damage, figuring out new ways to eliminate that damage. Fine, that needs to happen. But there are things that we never did work on Sense Research Foundation because we didn't need to, namely things that other people were working on because they were relatively low-hanging fruit, relatively easy to develop, but equally important, of course. And those are the things that we're focusing on combining in the experiment going on at LEV Foundation because they are already individually demonstrated by other people to have some benefit in terms of mean and maximum lifespan in normal mice, even when you start the experiment in relatively late life, like middle age, when the mice are maybe 1.5 years old out of the total of 2.5 that your typical mice live to on average. So these are very two different phases, so to speak, in the development of any divide and conquer strategy. First of all, develop the components, then develop the best ways to combine the components. In terms of parallelizing and throwing more money at the problem, absolutely, this is very much an issue. In terms of the ongoing stuff on the really difficult types of damage, there's value in having money, but actually it kind of hits diminishing returns, because you've just got to assess what you've learned and figure out what to do next. I'm not saying it really has hit diminishing returns yet, but there's a limit to how much one can productively spend. Whereas on the experiments that we're doing at LEV Foundation, there's less of that. We could certainly run a couple more of these 1,000 mouse experiments right now if we had. I mean, they cost north of $3 million each. So, if we had that kind of money, then we'd certainly be doing that. The mice are available. We don't have to wait for the mice to get to 18 months old. We can buy them already pre-aged. So yeah, I mean, it's expensive, but it's doable, and it definitely is scalable.